All right, nerds, I have a special treat for you today. I have Sal Albanese. Is it Albanese? How do I pronounce your surname, sir?
Albanese is fine.
Albanese. Yes.
Yep.
Okay. I have Sal Albanese from New York, who I just heard in the back, in the green room when we were chatting before going live, had endorsed Andrew Yang for mayor. So huge nerds for humanity points right there, given our audience. But you're also a big advocate for Final Five voting, and we had Catherine Gale on the show like a year or
Hey
two
Tom,
ago.
I forgot to say hello nerds.
Oh, of course. With that, we're first of all, let's get the show started with hello, nerds.
Hello nerds.
All right, thank you, Sal. Well, welcome to the show, Sal. How are you doing? Where are you joining from?
I'm actually out in New York in Suffolk County.
Mm-hmm.
We have a house out east. I live in New York City, but during the summer we spent a lot of time out in Long Island. So, and the
Very
weather's
nice.
beautiful here.
Yes, very
So
nice.
the
Yeah.
beaches. So the beaches.
Yeah. You got to go to the water, especially in the summer.
Absolutely.
So let's start with a little bit of an introduction to you. Jeremy is welcoming all of us to the show. Hello, nerds, and so is John Perrin. Um, Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and then of course we'll get into what happened in Alaska and all those other types of topics.
Well, thank you, and I thank you for inviting me to your program. I know you've got a lot of folks that watch this, and your interest in reform. I actually am an immigrant. I came here from Italy at the age of 8. Growing up in Brooklyn, and went on to become a school teacher. I spent 11 years as a teacher in the New York City public schools. Then I was kind of disgusted with what I saw going on in the political arena. I thought I thought most of the politicians in the city were not doing their job. So I decided to launch a grassroots effort for a school board race in
Mm.
my district, and I wound up winning by 11 votes. I was the ninth person
Wow.
to get elected. There were 9 members on that school board in those days. And then when I got on the school board, I became more and more upset about the quality of elected officials in my district. So, and I was always an outsider. I was never I'm a Democrat, but I was never part of the Democratic machine. So
Mm.
I ran a grassroots effort against an incumbent city council member who was in office for 21 years, and we wound up winning. It was a major upset in the city. He was actually the last Republican on the city council in those days. There are more now. And when I got there, I spent 15 years on the city council, and I was an independent and a reformer. I promoted term limits. I took on the Democratic leadership at the time over what I thought were issues that they were not addressing in the city. And I was reelected numerous times, 5 times, and I decided it was time to move on. And I ran for mayor in 1997 and garnered 22% of the vote, but lost. In the interim, I went to law school. I got my law degree, so I'm a lawyer. And then I spent the rest of the time until 2013 in the private sector, where I ran for mayor again, and unfortunately lost, because when you run as an independent in New York City,
Mm-hmm.
you're taking on the power structure like I did. It's very difficult, especially in terms of fundraising. I was not accepting money from lobbyists, from developers. So, but it was a great experience, and I'm a lifelong reformer, and I want to change the political system. It's broken, and I fell in love with nonpartisan elections, and also Final Five, which I discovered by reading Catherine Gale's book, The Politics Industry, which is a really great book by her and Michael Porter, which describes the state of our politics in this country,
Mm-hmm.
which is in dire straits. And I formed a group in New York City called New Yorkers for Competitive Elections, and the objective is to to adopt Final Five, the 2025 mayoral race in New York City. We want to get Final Five on the ballot next year. And we were fortunate enough to connect with the Institute for Political Innovation through with Catherine Gale, and we were able to receive a grant. So we have staff now, and we're working around the city to generate more and more support for Final Five. And what happened in Alaska and Wyoming was a great example of how Final Five could be very effective in electing folks that have the majority of folks supporting them. In New York City, we have a closed primary system, and it's really produces a low turnout, folks who are in the extremes, dominating the primary. So this is a great opportunity. We will have a lot of opposition. Obviously, as Alaska showed, they garnered, I think, 55% of the vote when they won. But we have a lot of good people, and I think the time is right for political reform. And boy, did we get lucky this week with what happened to what happened in Wyoming with Cheney, Murkowski, and of course Peltola in Alaska. So that's a quick background how I got myself involved in this.
I love it. Sal, for those of us who may not have super clarity on what we mean when we talk about Final Five, can you just give like a man on the streets explanation?
Sure. Well, what Final Five, it begins with a single ballot primary where every candidate runs on one ballot. Doesn't matter what party you can attach to a party. You don't have to belong to a major party or a minor party, and everyone can vote. For example, in New York City right now, we have 1.2 million independents, 25% of the electorate in the city, and they're not able to vote in the most important election. So this would give everybody an opportunity to vote in this single ballot primary, and then the top 5 vote getters, say for mayor, move on to the general election in November, and that's where the Final Five comes in. There are Final Five contenders, which will make the election competitive. In New York City, we don't have competitive general elections, especially for mayor. Basically, whoever wins the primary goes on to become the mayor, despite the fact that there's a general election in November. So the Final Five are basically going to be subjected to what we call ranked choice voting, which I was part of the Charter Revision Commission that adopted it for the primaries in New York City. So we would move ranked choice voting from the primary to the general election, and there would be an election in November, obviously, and then say there are 5 candidates. The candidate that has the least amount of votes at the end of the day, voters can choose 1 to 5. They can choose 5 candidates, rank them in order of preference. They can choose 2 candidates, what have you. So the last person is Sal Albanese. I garnered 20% of the vote, and I came in last place. My number twos then would be redistributed to the rest of the candidates until one candidate garners more than 50% of the vote. So that's the way it works. But there's Final Five. In Alaska, it was Final Four. So the votes are redistributed according to order of preference. And this guarantees that the person who wins will have over 50% of the voters who turned out supporting that candidate. So when they govern, they will govern with a mandate rather than in New York City. We've had the last couple of elections, folks being elected in the Democratic primary with 13% of the electorate. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Eric Adams was elected by 17% of all registered voters. Under Final Five and instant runoff for ranked choice voting in November, the person that wins will have a mandate from over 50% of the folks in the city, which is important from a governance perspective because you know how politics works, right? If 12% of the people elect you, and you want to get reelected, you're gonna pander to 12% of the electorate, because the rest of the folks don't really matter that much,
Mm-hmm.
because of the electoral system that we have. So that's how Final Five works, and I think it's a gold standard for electing folks. Actually, it's a gold standard for democracy. It opens up the process. And the people that are generally against it are the incumbents, the political machines, the people that benefit from having a closed primary. It kind of makes it easier for them to get reelected. The lobbyists love it, because they don't want they have relationships with the incumbents, and this will shake things up. The PR people will love it, because love the present system.
Mm-hmm.
The voters, unfortunately, a lot of the voters don't really don't grasp it, because they're not paying attention. But with ranked choice voting in New York City, people said that would be confusing when we passed it in 2019, but it wasn't confusing. We spent some money advertising, we explained it, and in Alaska, we have a real live example that the Alaskans understood the effort, and actually it worked to perfection. Murkowski would have been dead on arrival, the senator from Alaska in the Republican primary. She would have lost for sure. But she was able to move on to the general election because independents and Democrats were able to vote for her. Same thing with Sarah Palin. She, as you know, she's on the extreme fringe of the Republican Party.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a Nicholas Begich, who was a mainstream Republican, was in the race as well. And what happened there is that a lot of Begich's voters, when he came in last, and went to Peltola, who was a Democrat, and she won the election. But it showed that it works. It works that mainstream moderate candidates who appeal to the majority of voters do well, and it augurs well for governance. The polarization level, as you know, Tom, is at an all-time high in this country. And part of the reason is these partisan primaries that attract the most extreme activists on both sides of the aisle. This would give people more choices. It would guarantee that all voters can participate, and it would provide for competitive general elections, which will result in a candidate that will have the majority of voters supporting them, which of course helps governance. At the end of the day, it will focus candidates to focus on problems, solving problems, and holding people accountable, beyond the party stuff.
Sal, let me ask you a clarification question, because I was wondering about this, and Sid as well in the chat. It's ranked choice voting in the general, but not in the primary.
Right.
Is there a reason why you wouldn't use ranked choice voting in the first round as well?
There would probably it probably be too many candidates in that, you're having
Too many to rank.
you're gonna have
Yeah,
in New York City, for example, we had like 25 people running, and
yeah, yeah.
you know so I mean, it's definitely a decent argument, but the single ballot primary and the nonpartisan, I think, is more effective, and actually simpler than having two ranked choice processes.
So you, being a Final Five RCV kind of activist or supporter, and being in New York, having observed the New York mayoral primary, as well as having been a former New York City mayor candidate in previous elections, you have a really interesting perspective. And I'm curious what's your retrospective on what happened in the NYC primary, the most recent one? Because I guess I was thinking that someone like Garcia would have done better, because she seemed like she would be more appealing to a broader group of people. Frankly, I thought Yang would have done better as well. But, Adam still kind of made it all the way through. I'm sharing on my screen kind of the results and
Right.
the rounds. And It didn't really change the ultimately, like the first round versus the eighth round. Adams was still the kind of top dog.
Yeah, well, um, Catherine did very well. I mean, she just lost by
Yeah, by
small
hair.
margin,
Mm-hmm.
but Adams was considered, believe it or not, the more moderate of
Oh,
all of the
okay.
candidates because of his
Right.
position on law enforcement, being
Right.
a former police officer, and with
Mm-hmm.
crime really skyrocketed in the city, he had the let's say the best position for folks who are interested
Mm-hmm.
in more proactive law enforcement. And also, Adams has a large African American base. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
in politics, we still have that's still something that is very, very powerful when people go out to vote. You know, people vote based on
Mm-hmm.
ethnicity, race. Andrew Yang, for example, Andrew had a significant amount of support in the Asian community, right?
Mm-hmm.
But which is a community that is becoming more and more influential as more and more folks register, but it wasn't enough to propel him forwards. And I endorsed him because he was the outsider. He wasn't connected to any of the party machines,
Mm-hmm.
and he's a true reformer. But Adams won for a variety of reasons. One is he was the most moderate in the race, and there was a tremendous sentiment on the part of many New Yorkers to elect somebody who was going to be more proactive on policing and law enforcement.
Do you think if New York had proceeded with a completely open primary and then a final five RCV, do you think it would have changed the results in this case, or do you think Adams still probably would have
It may
won?
have changed the results
Hmm.
because, especially between Garcia and Adams,
Hmm.
because it was very, very close, and 1.2 million independents in the city would have voted, would have been part of the process in November. It could have changed the results. I'm not saying definitively, but it may have changed the outcome because the general election is when most people turn out to vote, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and also Adams had the support of a lot of the political machines, and
Mm-hmm.
in November, with more and more voters turning out, the influence of the machines is diminished. So you have a larger pool of voters out there,
Mm-hmm.
and Garcia may have pulled it off because she was considered more independent and she had the New York Times endorsement. She could have prevailed over Adams in general.
And I can't help but ask you, what's your take on what happened to Yang in that when he announced in some early polls, he was kind of the front runner, had amazing name recognition, had a pretty big kind of network of supporters nationally, raised a good amount of money, and then ended up not only not winning, but kind of finishing fourth.
Yeah,
What do you
yeah.
think happened there?
Well, it was disappointing to all of us who supported,
Yeah.
and I think what happened is New York City politics is full of trapdoors,
Mhm.
and if you're not on the ground, if you don't know all these different constituencies in the city,
Mm.
and he made some mistakes by saying certain things and got himself involved in a couple of controversies, which I think was due to the fact that he was new on the political scene in New York City, and you've
Mhm.
got to be, he was never really local. Andrew's a national, focused on national issues, and ran for
Mhm.
president, as you know. But in New York City, you really have to have a good ear to the ground when you're dealing with the multitude of constituencies out there. So I think he made some mistakes. as he proceeded with the campaign, and that's what hurt him. Although he did very well in the Asian community.
Yeah. And do you think the Asian community um sort of came out sufficiently? Were they activated enough, or do you think like that because what I've heard two explanations on the Asian community, that actually with the older generation Asian Americans, he comes across a little bit too progressive, and especially the basic income stuff. They even like my own mother, who grew up on the East Coast and is Asian American, she's kind of suspicious of basic income, as
Right.
much as she thinks it would be cool to have someone like Yang rise to a position of leadership. Did that Asian community get activated, disproportionately? Because it could have. I don't know if it did. Do you have a
No,
sense of that?
I mean, you're making some good points. They definitely turned out in larger numbers than they would have
Uh-huh.
turned out with Andrew in the race. I mean, I've talked to a couple of my friends
Mm-hmm.
in the Asian community whose parents never voted before, and they were like energized
Oh, okay. Okay.
about Andrew Yang. And going out to vote, but yeah, I mean, I don't think the turnout was overwhelming in
Mm-hmm.
the Asian community, but certainly above average.
Right. Right. Right.
And also, the Asian community is a community that's growing in the city, and a lot of the folks are not registered yet.
Mm-hmm.
So that played a role. There wasn't enough uh, active folks supporting Andrew. I mean, there were also people in the Asian community supporting Adams, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
of ties to Adams
Yeah.
through whatever the nonprofit world or what have you. So,
Yeah.
but it was running for mayor in New York City is very, very complex, and also you really have to be very, very careful as you approach the different power blocks.
What do you think was the biggest trapdoor that he fell through, that Yang fell through, that in hindsight, if he could take it back, it would have helped him out a bunch?
I think he had a lot of supporters amongst young people,
Mm-hmm.
and and many of those young folks are interested in Palestinian rights, uh,
Oh
and and and
yeah.
and, and I think he alienated
Yeah.
those folks later
Yeah.
on by
Right.
saying, I forgot exactly what position he
Something,
took.
yeah, something. It was a fairly pro-Israel type of statement he made, or
Correct.
something that
Correct.
was interpreted that way. Yeah.
Correct. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely. And that really, I remember a lot of negative feedback on Twitter, and
Mm-hmm.
folks. As a matter of fact, I was at the press conference that I endorsed them on Staten Island. There were a couple of folks booing them, a couple of activists.
Mm.
And, in that community, the community that's very aggressive on Palestinian rights,
Yeah.
and in a low turnout election, all of that stuff is important. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not sure he was briefed properly on that issue,
Yeah.
because he could have handled it much better. But that was one of the problems, and the basic the universal income issue was also
Yeah.
something that people didn't appreciate. And although there were some supporters, there were, as you pointed out, your mom is very suspicious of basic universal income. So
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
that that played a role.
Yeah.
And he got himself in sort of a difficult position on a couple of those issues.
When I saw that tweet, kind of s- indicating some support for Israel, I didn't realize how big of a backlash it would create, because I assume that there are also constituencies in New York that are very pro-Israel, and
Oh
would have
yeah,
seen that as a sign of like an affirmation. Okay, yeah, he gets it, kind of thing. How
yes,
should someone running for mayor of New York handle that issue, or just not talk about it, or?
very very delicately. Basically, my position is there should be a two-state solution,
Mm-hmm.
and, and basically that's the position most folks take. It should be negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and there should be a two-state solution. But that it's a very tough issue. You have got a very, very aggressive pro-Israeli community, and also a growing pro-Palestinian effort in the city. So, but running in New York City is you're full of those issues. I mean,
Mm,
you run into these kinds of hot button issues all over the place. I mean,
yeah.
you could, for example, Italian Americans, right? They're furious over the fact that some people want to take down the Columbus statue in the city. That's another hot button issue. Eric Adams, Eric Adams actually captured the leadership of the Italian American community by saying he supports the Columbus statue in Columbus Circle in New York City.
Mm,
There's a huge Christopher Columbus statue in New York City, and then Bill De Blasio got into trouble, and he's Italian American with the Italian American community because they decided in the Board of Education calendar not list Columbus Day but Indigenous Day. So all of these things can cost you a lot of headaches in New York City. As you pointed out, it is an incredibly diverse city.
yeah.
It's and all of these different groups have
Mm-hmm.
power blocks, some more powerful than others, and it does create a lot of tension and a lot of difficulties for candidates unless you're really schooled on those issues.
Wow, you're just walking through like a field of landmines.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I dealt with that stuff when I was running for mayor. You're always
Yeah.
and reporters will ask you the most polarizing questions,
Right,
right?
right.
And you got if you're not prepared, you're gonna be
Yeah.
in quick you'll be in quicksand very quickly.
Yeah. And then if you don't take a position in an effort to not offend anyone, then you appear like, wishy-washy or milk toast, right?
Very
Yeah.
very true. Very true.
Yeah. That's a
Very
tough one.
but yeah, but sometimes um, you really it's the lesser of two evils, right? Because you can wind up you can have a great campaign for the entire city, making things better for folks.
Mhm.
These issues which are not on the minds of most New Yorkers can sink your
Yeah.
campaign.
Crazy. Well, we're gonna teleport to Alaska because we need to talk about the Palin results and ranked choice voting over there. But before we go to the topic of Alaska, I want to ask you one last question because you and I both were chatting before the show about Italy and New York pizza. Uh, if you had to choose to have your next slice of pizza, would it be in New York or would it be somewhere in Italy?
Oh, it'll be somewhere in Italy, in Rome. In Rome.
All right, I tend to agree with you because as much as I do love New York pizza, I
So
feel
do
like
I. So do I.
the kind of like the thin and chewy dough that I experienced in Italy was really delicious and unforgettable. And you can have a few slices and not feel like you're, you know, binging or anything. So
Right.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah.
No doubt about it. But I'm a big pizza lover as you are, Tom.
It's a little bit. My wife tells me I like it a little too much. I need to cut back on that, but from time to time, it's okay. Let's talk about Alaska, not known for their pizza. I'm not sure what cuisine Alaska is known for. Maybe salmon, but they are known for ranked choice voting. And what we have here is a former vice presidential candidate, national name, endorsed by former President Trump. Kind of in some ways pre-MAGA. I mean, she was, drill baby drill and kind of like in your
Mhm.
face, lamestream media, all that stuff. And somehow she couldn't win the congressional seat. Like, what's your kind of retrospective on what happened here in Alaska?
Well, Tom, as you know, she's extremely controversial, uh,
Mm-hmm.
polarizing. So that's why she lost, because half of the Republicans that were supportive of Nicholas Begich, um, their number two votes went to Peltola, the
Mm.
Democrat, and that's the beauty of ranked choice voting. The moderate. Peltola was perceived to be a lot more moderate than Sarah Palin, who's on the extreme fringe of the Republican Party, and that's what happened. And she, Nicholas Begich, in my view, had he been he's a moderate Republican.
Mm-hmm.
If she wasn't in the race, there's a very good chance that he would be the congressman. But that's exactly what happened. The final four, um, with ranked choice voting, basically eliminated the most extreme candidate, who was Sarah Palin.
Mm. And so in this case, what I've heard from Palin and some folks in the MAGA camp is that ranked choice voting was too confusing to people, and it distorts the will of the people, and it's like part of a conspiracy to undermine the MAGA movement. How would I know we don't you probably don't agree with that, I don't, but how would you respond to people because they hear that
First of
on
all,
on in conservative media?
there's no way. The conservative media, of course, frames arguments, to appeal to their very extreme audiences in many cases, and people should be exposed to a lot more than just conservative media. But what happened is, I know from personal experience, being on the
Mhm.
Charter Revision Commission in New York City, about
Mhm.
when we adopted ranked choice voting. The same argument was made. Oh, it's going to be too confusing, right? Which is
Mhm.
nonsense. And what we did was we had witnesses come in from other jurisdictions where ranked choice voting was adopted, and they demonstrated that it's not that hard to figure out. Ranking candidates is not that hard to figure out. There's a study that was conducted. It's maybe in today's New York Times, that showed that, like, overwhelming numbers of Alaskan voters understood ranked choice voting. So that's one of the arguments that was used in New York City against ranked choice voting. It's too confusing. It's uh, the conspiracy theories that you can fix elections with through ranked choice voting is ridiculous. I mean, it makes no sense. You'd have to brainwash the whole populace, right? For a strategy to kind of thwart ranked choice voting. So I don't subscribe to that at all. And not only that, I was personally involved in New York City when we adopted ranked choice voting, and that argument proved to be false, because most people understood it, and there was no majority of folks after the election in 2021, the mayor's race, that
Mhm.
said, "Oh, we couldn't figure this out." Everybody figured it out. I mean, the vast majority of people figured it out.
So, in as far as New York is concerned, do you think choice voting is gonna stay? Like we've gotten over the initial kind of transitional pains, or do you think there's gonna be people that are gonna try and roll it back?
Oh, I think it will stay. I think it will
Mm,
remain. There's no wave of anti-ranked choice voting in New York City, and if there was, you'd know about it.
mhm,
Folks would
mhm,
come out and really criticize it and point out all the flaws. No one has surfaced that said that, making the argument that it was too confusing, It was, it fixed the election because it's totally untrue, and it was supported by the majority of the editorial boards in the city as well.
Yeah. And what I've got up here now on the screen is a little breakdown of the round by round voting in Alaska. And I think it underscores what you were saying is that just a reminder to the viewers that Nick Begich is actually a Republican, but he got the third most votes. So Mary Peltola got 40%, Palin got 31, and then Nick Begich got 28. Now you would assume, oh well, he's a Republican, so all of his votes would have gone to Palin because she's a Republican. But in fact, in round two, not all of his votes went to Palin. A lot of them did, more than anyone else, but enough of them went to Peltola that it then pushed Peltola over the edge by just a nose, 51 to 49. And then Sarah Palin didn't win. So basically, Palin wasn't able to earn enough of the number two votes of her fellow Republican Nick Begich's supporters. Is that how you read what happened?
Absolutely, that's
Yeah,
exactly. I think
yeah,
you hit the nail on the head, Tom.
that's crazy. So it kind of penalizes the extreme candidate who only appeals to, this corner, this kind of very activated but small corner of a party, and it rewards the people who are able to pull supporters from other candidates, which generally tends towards kind of the moderate candidates, which then results in a person who more Alaskans now know that they kind of they supported this person. Maybe she wasn't their first choice, Peltola, but was at least on their list.
Correct. That's
Interesting.
exactly right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
correct.
yeah, yeah. Now, I don't think that would have changed much for Cheney, though, right? If they had
No.
RCV there, because it's
Well,
just such a hardcore.
I don't
Hmm?
know. I mean, I don't know. We wouldn't know. She was. I mean, she was defeated overwhelmingly.
Yeah,
And there's still a lot of there are significant numbers of Democrats in Wyoming, and if we had open primaries or final five, it could have changed the equation. But the fact that she was beaten so badly in that close primary
yeah,
demonstrates how, and these close primaries are dominated by the most extreme partisans on both sides. By the way, the
yeah, yeah.
democrat the Democrats in Nevada are fighting,
Hmm.
battling against the initiative in Nevada, because it'll be on the ballot. Final five will be on the ballot in Nevada, and Democrats are against it. So, it shows that when both parties attack something, both party machines attack something, that we must be doing something right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I actually watched one of the debates. I don't know how many they had, but I watched one of them, the primary debates in Wyoming, and I was so surprised at how I felt, even though I don't agree with a lot of her policy positions, that Cheney was like clearly the adult in the room, and there were a lot of like really out there folks. But ultimately, those out there folks. I mean, one of them was Hagman, and she won the whole thing,
Yep.
which is crazy because I think in terms of conservative policies, like Liz Cheney, with the one exception of voting to impeach Trump, she's as conservative, small government, pro-gun, anti-abortion, like as you can get. And somehow, like the whole party turned on her.
Yep.
Yeah,
Well, Tom, I mean, it's the MAGA movement obviously is still very powerful. Trump is still very powerful in the party with these folks, and Cheney. I mean, I don't agree with much of her platform, but she is clearly smart, and I have to say courageous. Very few people will do what she did. Very few politicians will take positions that will alienate her core constituency, which
Mm-hmm.
is, conservative Republicans. And her father, was one of the top conservative
Oh
Republicans in
yeah.
the country for years.
Mm-hmm.
So I have a lot of respect for Liz Cheney. I think she knew she was in trouble. Final five would have helped her. Uh, the outcome may have still been the same, but it
Yeah.
would
Yeah.
have at least been a lot closer.
Now, if you had ranked choice voting in the 2016 Republican presidential primary, I have a feeling Trump would not have become the nominee,
I agree with
right?
you. Yeah, absolutely.
Because
I
he
agree with you.
he he was the definition of someone who got like this small corner super fired up, and no one else in the party really liked him.
Right. Right.
But he was first past the post because everybody else like Rubio and Jeb, they all kind of split their votes across. And wasn't there? Oh, Chris Christie was up there.
Yeah,
There were a
Christie was
lot of
there.
there were a
Yeah.
lot of compelling candidates, but none of
Yeah.
them, like if there was RCV, I'm sure one of those more kind of reasonable Republicans would have
I
would have
agree.
would have gotten over the 50% if we reallocated.
I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. And that's why we have such extreme polarization in the country, because those close primaries generate a lot of folks that are extremely polarizing, and Trump said the most outrageous things, and he did very well. He captured those folks, and he still has a lot of sway within that group. But they don't make up the majority of the voters in this country.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's if anything, like Trump's a perfect example of maybe why RCV could have saved us from clearly polarizing person, and Palin is an example of how it works, you
Yes,
know.
absolutely.
So
Re-
what's the plan going forward? Like, what are your next big pushes in terms of getting Final Five out there, and how can people learn more and support and get more involved if they want to help?
They would go to our website, final5voting.nyc, final5voting.nyc, and they could stay involved. They could help, maybe through donation, volunteering. What we're doing now is we're building support. Tom, I'm
Hmm.
meeting with the business community. I'm meeting with different groups, that compose the power blocks in New York City.
Hmm.
We are reaching out to Asian American voters. We have a couple on our steering committee, and one of the things that was pointed out was that many of the new voters, Asian American voters, are registering as independents in the city.
Hmm.
So we're going to be reaching out to those blocks as well. We are reaching out to labor, organized labor, which is a big group in New York City, very influential. We are reaching out to elected officials, former and current. So we're in the phase of building support across the city, and after November, we will begin gathering signatures. We're going to have to garner about 60,000 signatures before June.
Hmm.
Then it goes to the city council, and the city council will definitely reject it. They won't approve it. So we'll have to garner another 30,000 signatures before Labor Day next year. So that's our effort, in a nutshell. And we're also obviously, we received a grant from Catherine Gale's group, the Institute for Political Innovation, and
Hmm.
we will be meeting with donors to bolster our financial efforts, because we are going to need television, and we're going to need radio and literature, which is expensive in New York City. So we're planning for an air war and a ground war. We're going to run a grassroots campaign, and at the same time also have enough resources to go on television and radio and so on and so forth, digital ads and what have you. it's going to take some real money,
Mm-hmm.
millions of dollars to get this across the finish line in November. But I'm excited about it. So is our team, and hopefully you'll you'll talk to the fellow nerds. Maybe they can help us. You'll
Yeah, definitely. The Nerds for Humanity audience has been known to dig into their pockets from time to time and support causes they care deeply about. One question I have for you, Sal, is it's interesting in that New York City already for the single party primary has ranked choice voting, and I get the argument for final five and having open ones to begin with. uh, that seems like an incremental improvement versus like parts of the country that are still doing first past the post for all of their voting. How do you make the argument to people like, no, we need to keep going. We can't just be happy with ranked choice voting at the primary level, which you were an advocate for in the past. So
right.
thank you for doing that. Like, how do you make that argument that it's still worth pushing further?
Well, it's worth pushing forward because you still have in New York City, you're still not allowing 1.2 million independent voters to participate in the most
Mm,
important election. And I pointed out in an op-ed piece that I wrote for the Daily News that if you review Adams's victory, he was elected by 17% of registered voters in the city. So
mm,
that's the argument that the RCV is a small step forward in the primary, but you really have to go further to really reform the system and reflect the candidate, select a candidate that has the majority of voters supporting him or her. Very small step forward. And by the way, Tom, we need to reform our entire political system. We need campaign finance reform. We need independent redistricting. We need stronger lobbying laws. This is not a panacea. It's a major step forward in terms of reforming our politics,
mm-hmm.
but we have a broken system. But RCV alone is not going to be enough to make the changes that we need in terms of governance.
One last question before we let you go, Sal. Andrew's now in the news working with Christine Todd Whitman and some others to try and form a third party, the Forward Party. And, there's been a lot of criticism of that party saying, hey, you're going to spoil the elections, you're going to take away moderate votes from Democrats and basically reelect Donald Trump and all these kinds of things. And I've even heard some people say like, don't start your third party until you have ranked choice voting. Otherwise, you're a guaranteed spoiler. What's your view? Because you're kind of nonpartisan, but also pro RCV. Like, what do you think about third parties? How should that be supported relative to election reform?
The way I look at it, what Andrew is doing is really setting the stage for political reform. So that without going into third party candidacies and what have
Mm,
you, I think he's going to be more successful promoting RCV and Final Five. Third parties are complicated. I mean, and
mm-hmm.
there's not a good history there. But he's a visionary. He thinks that's the way to go. I'm more interested in election reform at this point. I think that's the secret to a better. That's the solution to a better political system, a more democratic system.
All right. Well, if anybody's out there and you have in the past, like I have, bemoaned the level of polarization in this country and how you're kind of shocked that these people that end up in Congress and sometimes higher offices seem to represent a very small slither of the country and almost are rewarded by polarizing us and dividing us. Check out what Sal and Catherine Gale and others are doing with Final Five initiatives, and maybe New York, like in so many things, will lead the country and push to show a better way to do things. So thanks again, Sal, for coming on and spending time with us. And, hope to see you again. With that, I'll say goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds, and thank you, Tom, for having me on.
You bet. Have a great rest of your weekend. Take care,
Thank
Sal.
you. Same to you. Thanks.
Bye. All right. That was Sal Albanese from New York. Runs for mayor a couple times, city council, former teacher, Andrew Yang supporter, and now big push for New York to implement open primaries, followed by RCV in the general, which is a different path than they currently have, which is they have RCV in the primary, and then the general is kind of a fait accompli because New York really doesn't have is dominated by the Democratic Party. So I'm guessing he's not going to get a lot of fans from the Democratic establishment, and he would probably say, yes, that's a good sign. But check out if you want to learn more about what he's up to and other types of innovations in election reform. A good site is the politicalinnovation.org site. So let me just put the URL here if you want to check it out. Create banner, paste, add banner. It's political-innovation.org. And, again, their big push is to get rid of political party primaries that just have a free-for-all primary, take the top 5, and then in the general, use RCV, which I think is a great idea. And I hope we do that in California. California, we kind of have an open primary where we take the top 2 candidates irrespective of political party, but then we don't do RCV with the top 5. We just have the top 2, and then I kind of prefer this approach here, but we'll see how it goes. If you're wondering, like, wow, this is very interesting policy commentary. I wish there was more content like this, and I hope this Nerds for Humanity channel keeps producing stuff like this. Just know that this is possible largely because we have folks like you who've become members of the channel, and they help support the podcast hosting fees, the software licensing fees to just keep this thing running. It is a unprofitable channel, but it is subsidized by amazing members who I want to personally thank now. And we're going to start with our most supportive member, who many of you know is Soldier One. So Soldier One is our highest level member. He is a senior vice president, and you can become a member too by just clicking the join link on YouTube. So just go to the Nerds for Humanity channel and then click on join, and you can be as supportive of nerd content as Soldier One. And then additional big time supporters are our vice presidents after our senior vice president, and that's Bike and Kristen Slevin. So Kristen's been a member for almost 3 years now. And then next level down is our hardcore nerds. In order of time as member, we have Gene, David, DK, Jackalego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Mona, Vaughn, Yang, Robert, Dean, Stat, Galessa, J. Perrin, AH, Dana, Jason, Parth, and Daniel. Also, thanks to StreamYard for helping support the cost of the live streaming fees. And then we've got our entry level nerds who you can join. It's only like $1.99 a month. Cancel anytime. Lisa, Albert, Brandon, Arez, Sophia, Doris, Emerald, Ben, Rasta, James, Emma, Hui, Elizabeth, Ira, Shoni, Jameson, Doctor, William, Karen, Ardent, Zemery, Mai, Brittany, Warren, Wana, Lucky, Kevin, Nell, Toby, Jeremy, David, and Nicholas. So thanks to all the channel members. We actually have a members only panel coming up, I think, next week. So if you want to join, you can get an invitation and be a participant on the discussion panel and join me on the live stream and fire up your webcam and we'll talk about politics. I also want to thank the people who make our ofthepeople.us project possible, and that is currently um, under maintenance. So the site's down at the moment of this stream, but it'll be up again soon. And it's kind of like a Yelp for political candidates, help people get discovered more using approval voting to rank them. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye, nerds. I have some more content coming up. So look out for, I think I'll do a analysis of the Kim Iverson interview, because I know a lot of people ask for that, where she talks about the Forward Party. So I'll do that tomorrow or Monday, depending on the schedule. And if you're like, hey, I like what you're doing, Tom, I just can't scratch up the coin to become a member. What you could do if you're made it this far into the video is definitely hit that like button, smash it, as they say, and then share out this stream so other people can benefit and know about Sal's take on RCV. I thought his analysis of why Yang lost New York was really cool. His take on the Sarah Palin results and the work they're doing with Final Five in New York. So share it out. And then put in the comments below what future topics you'd like me to hit. And I read all of the comments and often will act and create content based on what you guys want. So put it in the below. And if you're a member, I'll give special attention and consideration to any suggestions from our channel members. With that, I'll say goodbye, nerds.